This was not merely a clash of trenches and artillery. It was not a war won by bayonets and barbed wire alone. The Great War was also a financial battle fought through gold reserves, bond markets, central banks, and in the hidden offices of financial experts who never set foot on the battlefield. Soldiers paid with their blood. Bankers and governments paid with calculations. What they crafted in that era did more than determine victory or defeat. It reshaped the global financial system in ways that still trap you today. If you believe war is only about politics and military force, it is time to reconsider. The Great War proved that money can be a weapon, and one of the most dangerous ever devised. In 1914, Europe was already a powder keg soaked in ambition. National rivalries, imperial desires, and tangled alliances had turned the continent into a paranoid chessboard. Yet beneath the talk of honor and empire lay a financial truth. A conflict of this scale could not be sustained without immense monetary force. And that truth would fall heaviest on the working class. When leaders chose war, they also accepted a future of debt. Every empire that sent its young men to the front silently pushed its people toward economic hardship. At the start, many governments hoped the conflict would be short over by Christmas. They believed traditional methods, gold-backed borrowing and patriotic donations, would be enough. Within weeks, that illusion shattered. The war consumed money faster than anyone could imagine. To put it plainly, in the summer of 1914, Europe's financial system still rested on the gold standard. Nations guaranteed their paper money could be exchanged for real gold. This built confidence, but also chained governments to the limits of their reserves. Gold was finite. No country could print money endlessly without losing the trust of its people and its creditors. Britain, France, and Germany held large gold reserves. But once millions of men were mobilized and industry turned to weaponry, costs soared. By late 1914, Germany was spending more than 10 million marks a day, while Britain's daily costs soon reached 2.5 million pounds. The arithmetic was brutal. Gold could not last, and so nations began suspending the rules. One by one, the great powers abandoned the gold standard, forcing their citizens to accept that money was no longer grounded in metal, but in collective belief. This severing of the gold link marked one of the most significant financial transformations in modern history. It revealed how fragile a nation's real wealth truly was. Money and power were no longer tied to metal. They were shaped by printing presses, credit, and persuasion. Once governments tasted this new freedom, they never turned back. A new kind of financial war had begun. Isolated from global capital and strangled by the British naval blockade, Germany had only one option left: domestic borrowing. Berlin launched massive bond campaigns, urging citizens to invest their savings in war loans as an act of patriotism. Propaganda flooded the streets, heroic soldiers on posters, families urged to sacrifice comfort, constant promises that investors would be repaid after victory. Germany raised more than 100 billion marks, but it was a pyramid built on hope. When defeat came, the bonds became worthless. The savings of millions of Germans evaporated, fueling a decade of social unrest and extremism. Economic history leaves deep scars. Britain, by contrast, held a powerful advantage. London was the financial center of the world. The pound was trusted across continents. At first, Britain relied on short-term borrowing, treasury notes, and patriotic drives. But soon, it sought deeper wells of credit, most notably from the United States. In 1914, America was officially neutral, but its bankers saw opportunity. Firms like J.P. Morgan brokered enormous loans, facilitated purchases of weapons, food, and raw materials, and became the financial backbone of Britain and France. By the time the U.S. entered the war in 1917, Wall Street had long been funding the Allies. This was no act of charity, it was a demonstration of power. American bankers made immense profits, and the United States emerged from the war not as a debtor, but as a creditor and a rising global force. If you wonder why the 20th century became the American century, the answer begins here. Meanwhile, France fought a different battle won in its ledgers. The costs of defense pushed an already fragile economy to the edge, still burdened by the legacy of the Franco-Prussian War. France borrowed heavily both domestically and abroad. Though French citizens were known for their thrift, the vast majority of financing once again came from across the Atlantic. Like Britain, France became increasingly dependent on American capital. After the war, this dependence would turn the repayment of debts into a political battlefield. And when we speak of the economic crisis that followed, we must remember, it was not just about reparations or stock markets, but the accumulated weight of 4 years of devastation. Russia's situation was even worse. Though vast in territory, the empire was underdeveloped. Its banking system was weak, its gold reserves impressive on paper, but insufficient in reality. Russia borrowed enormous sums, especially from France, to sustain its war efforts. But repeated defeats and rising inflation destroyed confidence in the ruble. By 1917, the Russian economy collapsed, dragging its political system down with it. The fall of the Tsar was not driven solely by ideology or military failure. At its root lay a broken economic system. Financial mismanagement, monetary chaos, and inflation ignited revolution. Once again, money and power walked hand in hand. The scale of financial damage was staggering. By the war's end, the Allies had spent over $140 billion. The Central Powers, nearly $60 billion. These figures dwarfed their pre-war national incomes. What emerged was not merely a mountain of debt, but the collapse of the old financial order. Global trust was shattered. The gold standard died. Inflation spread like wildfire across economies. Germany would soon face inflation so extreme that a simple loaf of bread cost billions of marks, paid by ordinary people, workers, savers, small investors. Meanwhile, the wealthy protected themselves by transferring assets abroad, buying real goods, and staying close to the centers where information flowed first. The lesson was cruel, but unmistakable. In financial conflicts, the small saver bleeds first. This is where the connection becomes clear. The Great War taught governments that money could be stretched beyond reality. They learned they could suspend the gold standard, print endlessly, issue bonds to their own citizens, borrow abroad, and then repair the damage with propaganda and reconstruction. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this strategy never ended. Every major crisis since the Great Depression, the 2008 financial collapse carries the fingerprints of 1914. When governments and central banks insist that inflation is temporary and fundamentals are strong, remember, they said the same in 1914. Millions trusted them until their money dissolved. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the world found itself standing not only on ruined battlefields, but on ruined balance sheets. America, once in debt, now held the world's largest gold reserves and had become its greatest creditor. Europe, the old center of global finance, was crushed under obligations. Britain owed the U.S. more than $4 billion. France owed over $3 billion. Even smaller nations were burdened with debts they could never repay. Wall Street, not London, became the new financial capital of the world. The era of American monetary power had begun, but the transition would not be smooth, because there was a catch. When wars are financed through debt, the repayment itself becomes the seed of the next conflict. Britain and France, determined to maintain the loyalty of their citizens who had bought war bonds, demanded massive reparations from Germany. The Treaty of Versailles imposed an astronomical sum, 132 billion gold marks. It was designed to punish, but in reality, it was impossible. Germany could not pay. Whether through printing money or shipping goods, each attempt pushed its economy closer to collapse. The sight of Germans hauling wheelbarrows full of worthless banknotes in 1923 was no accident. It was the natural result of impossible debts, and these economic wounds sowed the anger that extremism later fed upon. Meanwhile, Britain attempted to restore its financial prestige by returning to the gold standard in 1925 at its pre-war rate. It was a disastrous mistake. The economy was wounded, industry weakened, debt heavy. Restoring the old value was like reattaching a broken limb without healing it. The result was deflation, unemployment, and social unrest. Even figures like Winston Churchill supported this policy, now regarded as one of the greatest financial miscalculations in modern history. Again, ordinary workers paid the price, while elites held onto their illusions of restored greatness. Across the Atlantic, the United States, overflowing with gold and credit, faced a different question: how to wield its new influence. American banks began sending capital to Europe, especially Germany. Germany used this money to pay reparations to France and Britain, who then used it to pay their debts to America. It was a financial loop disguised as stability, formalized in the Dawes Plan of 1924, and later the Young Plan of 1929. No new money was being created, old money was simply being recycled. And when the global economy began to crack, the entire system collapsed at once. The world had become financially connected in ways never seen before, and this interconnectedness made everything fragile. The Great War cannot be understood as merely a military chapter. It was an economic turning point where illusions and financial errors shaped the future. Governments learned they could suspend gold, debase currency, and borrow on unprecedented scales, while persuading their citizens it was all necessary. Propaganda could transform debt into patriotism, convince ordinary savers to buy bonds that would never be repaid, and prove that the real winners of war were not the soldiers in the trenches, but the men in boardrooms. Money and power became more intertwined than ever before, and the world has been adjusting to that reality ever since. Now, consider your own life today. Central banks claim inflation is temporary. Governments raise debt ceilings every year. New money is created instantly with the press of a digital button. Remember that the gold standard was not abandoned by choice, but by desperation. Remember that financing the future with borrowed illusions is a century-old habit. Every modern financial crisis, from the stagflation of the 1970s to the collapse of risky credit in 2008, traces its roots back to the wartime experiments of 1914. The same illusions persist. And once again, ordinary workers, small investors, and savers are asked to carry the burden. The hidden financial conflict behind the Great War is not a relic of the past. It is the foundation of the present. Its lesson is harsh but unforgettable. When money is detached from reality, it becomes a tool of manipulation. Governments will always find ways to finance crises through taxes, through inflation, through the erosion of your savings. True wealth lies not in numbers on a screen or in the promises of politicians, but in resilience, knowledge, and the ability to see beyond illusion. That is the only financial freedom history consistently reveals. And tonight, I leave you with this. History does not repeat itself exactly, it rhymes. The financial playbook written in 1914 still circulates today in a new language, with new actors. But the ending is always the same. The powerful survive, the uninformed suffer. And this is the message you must carry away. Never assume money is real simply because it exists. Never believe a system is sound simply because authorities claim it is. The truth is always hidden in the balance sheets, and history remains the only teacher that does not lie. If this story opened a new window for you, subscribe to the channel. History is full of answers if you know where to look.